Thanks for coming out. So, as Chris was saying, I have this collection of short stories called Mormonia, and you can buy it at the counter there. And it's 7 short stories set mostly in Salt Lake City, Utah, hence the title. So, and so I thought I would read from I've been reading a different one each reading, and so I'll read the last one, which is the 7th one, because there's 7 readings. So this one was, I guess, because it's Father's Day weekend, I'll tell you a little bit about it. This one was inspired by a story that my dad told me. He grew up as a Mormon in St. Petersburg, Florida, without a father, and so he kind of told me what that was like, and that sort of loosely inspired me to write this story. It's called Grable the Swan. Ricky, darling, do you have a moment? Richard felt his back prickle, a response that seemed to occur lately whenever his mother's voice rang out, catching him by surprise with its bell-like vibrato, forced notes of false cheer, tones that in other mothers might presage any manner of things, good or bad, but with Eleanor he'd come to learn almost always portended trouble. It didn't help that she was stewing, the last 2 weeks of a muggy summer, an idle time for most perhaps, but not her. She simply wasn't the type to give in to inertia. She was about to become a student teacher, and as she took pains to remind her children, she had lesson plans to review, materials to order, a classroom to decorate. Actually, she wasn't sure if she was responsible for any of these things, but they were the kinds of tasks she thought teachers might have, and readiness is all. She wanted to be ready for anything. At night, when she couldn't sleep, her mind kept working. Assigned to Pinella High, she thought she'd call ahead to get a provisional list of students. This isn't the final list, her master teacher said. It'll give you some idea anyway. What do you mean? Well, there's always a few who add or drop at the last minute. In a week or two, the master teacher explained, she'd be meeting off the record with the other teachers in the English department. Each would present her own list of names, valued like futures on some secret commodities market, where they'd be bartered and moved around like pork barrels or oil futures. Horse trading, it was called, though not officially frowned upon, but still practiced. Eleanor sat uneasily on the pilled cushion of her couch, a mug of Postum cooling in front of her. She appeared stricken, as if she'd been visited of late by some evil spirit or had spent all morning on the phone with the IRS. Her face was naturally wan anyway, but her lips, whenever she was truly enervated, seemed to lose their natural color, and now they were turned down and dour, reedy, perspicaciously thin. Richard bit his own lip nervously, tasted salt, and straightened his posture. His mother removed the tortoiseshell frames from her face in order to more convincingly glower at him. Her eyes were impenetrable brown, pupils large, sclera bloodshot from reading too many books. She was always reading. Richard had ice blue eyes, opaque but kind, an unkind reminder of his father. Perhaps because, in deference to his old man, Richard had begun to aggregate a kind of prepubescent fuzz beneath his nose, the sort that if one squinted hard enough and with sufficient imagination, one might generously conclude was more than mere shadow. It belied the promise of a new maturity, one full of boundless potential, probably thought by its wearer to soon bear a handsome return on its laborious and vain investiture. All those days he'd locked himself in the bathroom, crooked his neck and stretched his upper lip with fingers at either side of his mouth, checking pores and attending to that tiny garden below his nose. Someday and soon, though his mother had failed to take note of it, Richard would sport an actual mustache. When Eleanor's glasses came down to her side, she began to clean them on the hem of her poodle skirt, an affectation that routinely demarked the beginning of any serious parent-child conversation. It was as if she were engaging in the ritual to steady her nerves as much as telegraphing the gravitas of that moment, and Richard couldn't help but notice her trembling hands. Whether this was stage jitters or the onslaught of old age, he didn't know. She cleared her throat, placed the frames back on her head, and slid them up the wide ridge of her nose. I need you to talk to your brother for me. Richard felt the heat rise in his cheeks. He was, it was true, the designated family negotiator and had grown up deriving a peculiar satisfaction from the assumption that in the event of a hostage crisis, if it ever came to that, it would be up to him to negotiate the terms of his family's release, or, and this was a fantasy that always caused his lips to curl upward, the terms of his mother's surrender. What seems to be the trouble, Mother? I fear, well, there's really no easy way for me to say this, so I'll just come right out and say it. I fear your brother may have gotten himself involved with some filth, some smut. She paused as if her last word had gotten stuck in her throat, then swallowed hard, dotting the corners of her eyes with her pinky before she continued. So, little man, what are we going to do about this? Smut was a word he didn't know, though he could make out its meaning well enough. It was obviously something bad. Eleanor was their personal J. Edgar Hoover, both mother and father, a stern fatherly protector who dressed like a woman, and since the divorce she had often relied on Richard to run interference, to give her insight into the unaccountably black cesspool of male psychology in ways that perhaps would have been more uncomfortable had it not made him feel so grown up. However, finding himself thrust into such situations, expected to play the role of Eleanor's confidant, her big little man, made him feel like he was once again the center of her affections, a place he'd ceded long ago to Rachel when he hadn't stuck to practicing his instrument, developing his talents. I'm sure everything's going to be all right, Mother. A line he'd used to great effect in the past, but then as now he never knew whether it would work, whether anything would actually be okay. In the past, it had helped mitigate crises on a far-reaching variety of mostly inconsequential matters, but tonight, no amending effect whatsoever. Eleanor shot back a look that would have curdled milk inside a cow. Richard's shoulders stiffened. I found this pornography in his wallet, she said, depositing what appeared to be a glossy page, perhaps torn from a magazine, face down on the coffee table. It was all folded up. He picked it up. Eleanor looking past him. He could feel her warm breath, could smell at the post of her sour stomach. He was perspiring now. What exactly had she found? A page ripped out of the Sears and Roebuck's Christmas catalog? A drawing of a woman in black and white wearing a large girdle or a cone-shaped bra? Chip had previously shown him his collection of such images, kept safely, or so he'd thought, between his mattress and box springs. Richard tried not to let on. He dared not look up, didn't want to meet his mother's all-knowing gaze. He focused intently on the picture, busied himself with the task of straightening it out, hoping the evidence as it began to appear wouldn't be too damning. But with each unfold, it looked too good, which is to say, it didn't look good at all for him or his brother. Undressing the woman, emerging from its center, a centerfold? Surely his brother wasn't that stupid, or was he? He looked up briefly at the ceiling, summoning the strength of angels, and when his eyes came to rest again on that picture, creased everywhere with lines, he felt his heart perform a somersault. Here at last was an angel, a black and white photograph of Betty Grable, wearing a full-cut one-piece bathing suit, something not altogether immodest, posed on a beach somewhere, or maybe it was a soundstage. He'd read about that in a matinee magazine, matte paintings of cloudless, azure skies and white sands, real stuff brought in and deposited by the metric ton, raked with zen-like precision into impossible dunes of perfection. Grable's shades were raised, hair held together like a helmet. In her left hand she carried a parasol full of Japanese calligraphy. Was she left-handed? He didn't know. Perhaps the picture was inverted. The photograph, taken from behind, had Grable glancing over her shoulder with a come-hither look, a mischievous, full-lashed stare categorically shown to raise the blood pressure of men on either side of the Atlantic. And it now had the same effect on him. His pulse quickened, and he could feel the sweat accumulate on his brow. Richard. Thanks. So our next reader is Jillian Hamill. I'm just going to read some poetry for her, so please give it up for her.